Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the plight of the refugees from the Hizmet movement. Today we have a very special guest, Professor Sophia Pandya. My name is Elif Güngo and I'll be your host for today. Before we commence today's proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land which we gather virtually. So I'm currently joining this talk from the land of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This event is organised by Advocates for Dignity, which is a human rights organisation that aims to raise awareness about human rights violations around the world and in Australia. They do this by engaging with various communities and organisations, law and policymakers, media experts and academics and researchers. AFD envisions a world in which everyone is treated with dignity, respect and equity. Okay, so I'll also introduce our speaker for today, who is Professor Sophia Pandya. Professor Sophia Pandya is a professor and department chair at California State University at Long Beach in the Department of Religious Studies. A Fulbright scholar, she specialises in women and Islam and more broadly in contemporary movements within Islam. Professor Pandya describes the Hizmet movement as an admirable new religious movement and humanitarian civil society movement that seeks to get rid of boundaries that separate people from one another So I will like to express my warmest gratitude to her for joining us today. Okay, so the first, there's going to be two segments to this talk. The first segment, it will be a presentation delivered by Professor Sophia, and then the second segment will be a Q&A that we've organised. So we're going to talk about, so if you can start off the first segment, Sophia, that would be great.
Hi, and I'd like to say welcome to this program, and I'd like to thank Advocates for Dignity, and in particular, Abdul Jalil Bey for inviting me to present today. And greetings from California. I miss Melbourne, it's such a lovely city. I have so many friends there. So today we're going to talk about Turkish refugees, and my title is Turkish Refugees, Trauma and Hope. And you're going to see a lot of children's art throughout this presentation. I was able to collect refugee children's art, and I'm going back to Greece, in fact, in less than a week, and I'm hoping to collect some more and also to interview some more refugees. But let's start off with a quote by Mevlana Rumi, who says, "The cure for pain is in the pain. Good and bad are mixed. If you don't have both, you don't belong with us." So here's one drawing by a refugee. You see just an open book, you know, as if this person doesn't know what will happen next, right? It's a page that hasn't been written on yet. And here's some more artwork. You see a lot of disruption, right? The house is tilting, different countries, airplane rides, Turkish tea. This one looks like kind of like Starbucks, doesn't it? And then, you know, peace, symbols of peace, symbols of cooperation, getting along, shaking hands. And then over here you see, you know, the world divided in half, and in the sad half, this looks like the dark, sad half, right? There's a storm and there's children in boats trying to get to the happy place, right? Trying to get to the happy place. In the happy place, there's bunnies and flowers and the sun is shining here. So refugees are never only refugees. They are individuals with really complex identities. And in fact, it's not quite fair to call a refugee, you know, a refugee is a person that's displaced, a person that's experiencing displacement. Although it's, of course the term is refugee is convenient, but nobody wants to be called that really. So people that are displaced, they have complex identities, life problems, desires, hopes, and their lives have been deeply impacted by their experiences as refugees, but not defined. And while their stories are objectively appalling, many did not give up hope for a better future, or that though they're suffering, or that through their suffering, they were granted invaluable lessons and insight. And here you see a little Turkish girl holding hands with a Greek girl. And a lot of the children, they drew dogs. When they're drawing Greece, they draw dogs. I thought that was really funny. Like when they draw a picture of Turkey, they don't put the dogs in it, but when they draw Greece, they always put the dogs in it. You'll see it again. This is one of my favorite pieces of art. And it's by a little girl named Yusra. I stayed with her family. And in fact, I gave a copy of this picture to Hoja Fendi and took a picture of him holding it. And then that picture I sent back to the family. And so they're really happy about that. Because they, it's just so nice for them. But this picture is before, right? The top quadrant is a drawing of before the coup, with Anne and Baba and the three of the kids so happy. And then of course Baba is in prison here. And what's funny about this picture is that you're in prison with him, right? When you're looking at it, we're on the prison side. And then here they are crossing the river from Turkey to Greece, and the mom is smiling actually, but the kids are crying. And here they are. Their dream was, she drew this in Greece, but her dream was to get to Germany, and I can tell you that she did get to Germany. Yusra is now in Germany. There she is. So she's doing well in Germany right now, and that's what she imagined would happen, of course, with some bumps and problems, obstacles here and there, but at least she arrived to safety. Another beautiful piece of art. So thousands of Turks have fled Turkey, like over 50,000. Chiefly members of the Hizmet movement, but also Kurds, leftists, Alevis, anybody perceived as opposition has left. And in 2021, you have over 84 million people are displaced. That's more people that have been displaced. This is a crisis. Never in history have so many people been displaced before. So it's about 1 out of every 100 humans are displaced right now. And from that 84 million people, 35 million are children. So that should hit, right? 35 million are children. So I'm looking here at the potential for refugees to construct meaning from their trauma. I want to examine the trauma, like what form does it take? What are they experiencing? But also, how do they understand the trauma? What meanings do they make out of it? How do they maintain spirituality? How do they maintain a sense of hope? And here we have a picture of somebody pulling back a very dark reality for a light and bright, hopeful reality. I like this one, actually. It's very nice, right? This picture is of a girl, and she's doesn't have a voice, right? She's a voiceless person. She's distressed. And she's obviously on the Greek side. She crossed the river. In the middle of this heart, there's a river. She crossed, and on the other side is Turkey, right? Where there's the memories of, looks like jail and handcuffs and newspaper articles of bad things. What strikes me about this one is that she can't speak. And she doesn't seem to close her eyes. Her eyes seem very, like she sees, but she can't speak. And here you have, this really is fantastic, isn't it, this one? Here you have a refugee coming out of the river, just dripping with water down here. Arms stretched out, her hair is dripping with water, and she's looking up at the Acropolis. And I think this is a hopeful picture because she survived the crossing and she is wet, but she's looking up at the mountain, and it just seems to me that she's hopeful. So what happens when we think about collective trauma? In this case, the experience of displacement, there's a stigma to being displaced. There's a stigma to being a refugee. People wonder, well, why were they kicked out, or why did they have to leave? What did they do wrong? And so people actually internalize that. I had a lot of people that I interviewed, they apologized to me and to everybody that they were displaced. One woman said she wanted to go to every Greek person and say, I'm sorry, I came here illegally. And I had to point out to her that she actually did not arrive illegally. She arrived legally, because it's legal to flee. It's legal to flee persecution. But she felt a lot of shame. There's also language barriers. Children having to attend Greek schools and learn everything in Greek. People in different countries just not being able to speak the language there, and layers of shame. I noticed that actually the men seem to be the most ashamed, because oftentimes they felt as though they couldn't help their family sufficiently. So many men told me things like they would go outside every day and tell their wife they were just having a walk, but they would just go to the park and cry and then go home and try to act as though they were strong again, but they would, cry in the park. And they told me that they just, it was really hard not to provide for their family. One gentleman told me that the best moment that he had is when he finally was able to work and he could buy, milk and bread for his family with his own money, with the money that he made. Because it's just very hard to take assistance as a refugee for a very long time, especially for the husbands. So this is worsened by external perceptions of their status. Malky points out that refugees are seen often or depicted as tragic figures, as, quote, matter out of place, unquote, and thus polluting, but also as flattened objects of pity, devoid of agency, monolithic beings with a single wretched identity. So, I mean, you can imagine just the image. Remember, I think it's the little child, Alan Kurdi, with his red bathing suit, and he had passed away, he was laying on the beach dead. And, when people say the word refugee, sometimes that's what you think of. You think of people crossing bodies of water. Some of them make it, some of them don't, and that they need food, they need things, and, poor them. And you can imagine that that's not, that it doesn't feel very you lose your dignity. And that's why I like the name of that, your organization, Advocates for Dignity, because there's a real dignity loss in displacement. So this dove looks to be carrying, I think it looks like the Earth, and it looks like different celestial bodies here, right? Because this looks like one of these planets looks like Saturn or Jupiter or something, and here's the sun. So different celestial bodies. I think that's lovely. And here an airplane is leaving from Turkey, and people are parachuting to other parts of the world. The consequences of collective trauma are severe. People report higher rates of divorce, suicide, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, sleeping problems, eating problems, hair loss, ruptures in their relationships at every level. Okay, so many people did tell me that they can never speak to their father again, or during displacement, their grandmother died, or they had to leave children back home in Turkey. They left, but their children stayed. Of course, financial stress, but the one that I worry about the most is the diminished ability to parent effectively. And I think this is a real problem. I think, the movement has begun to address this more efficiently by providing mental health via Zoom, and all kinds of resources for Turkish or just Muslim psychologists to help out, because when you can't parent effectively, that affects the next generation. And I'm sure you've heard of intergenerational trauma. Sometimes the next generation and even the one after that inherit this trauma. And then if we look to the right at this image, you have a church and a mosque. A lot of the children drew that also. You know, Greece had dogs and Greece also has churches, right? And Turkey didn't tend to, in these pictures, have very many dogs, and they all had mosques here. So I like the balance, the symmetry in this beautiful picture, because it just, you know, looks friendly and loving, right? All of these different people from different places in the world are connected by hearts. Here's two more works of art. Here you have a girl, and her picture seems to be divided in half. And she's crying on one side, but happy on the other side. So the crying side, it looks like there's some awful institution over here. And maybe a table where not everybody is sitting, right? There's an empty chair. And over here, of course, you have a boat crossing. Lots of people crossing, people in water, it looks like walking through the water. And then, you know, and then the happy part is that there's people greeting them on the Greek side with Greek flags and balloons. So there's layers of invisibility. That's another consequence that people that are displaced experience. So, you know, of course, in Turkey, as people were purged from society, shunned, and many people had to go into hiding or put in jail, that of course they were made to be invisible, right? So there's that first layer of invisibility. And then as they crossed the river and actually became displaced people, became refugees, that gave them another level of invisibility. And then as they tried to speak the language in the new country and try to assimilate, they're not always seen, they're not always recognized, and some societies don't welcome them. So to be acknowledged as eligible for the official status of refugee in the host country, and later to be recognized as a legal resident or citizen, deserving of dignity, acceptance, and a life beyond a marginalized existence. They also fight to be employed, to have a voice in the new country, to feel as though they belong. Hizmet refugees are also particularly invisible because oftentimes they cannot speak, and for fear of retribution, they can't even post things on Facebook. Sometimes they're worried about phone calls. I have friends that even using the relatively safe app called WhatsApp, you know, one person was texting with her father, and her father is actually not in the movement, but because he was texting with her daughter in Southern California, or his daughter, he was thrown into jail in Turkey. So she can't even talk about it. I had her speak to my class about it, and she stopped talking after about 10 minutes, and I had to take her outside of the class, give her water till she could go back in. So, you know, what contributes to this invisibility is that, you know, other people, you know, that are not displaced, sometimes there's a lot of compassion fatigue. There's so many global crises right now that not everybody feels as though they can easily pay attention to every single one of them. And also, you know, in terms of displacement, Syrian refugees, there's about 6 million Syrian refugees that are displaced, but, you know, in Turkish displaced peoples, there's not, you know, there's not even 1 million, you know, there's maybe, you know, I'm not sure, but perhaps somewhere between 50,000 to 100,000, but there's, you know, the places that have created displacement are Syria, Afghanistan, and Yemen, and other countries, but Turkey's way down on the list. So not everybody knows about, you know, Turkish refugees. And then, of course, many people will say, Turkish refugees, you mean the refugees that are in Turkey? Because, of course, Turkey has absorbed almost 4 million refugees, so people get confused about that. Now, here's an image. I've had this translated to me, and I'm sure that all of you can read it. This image is of people trying to get through the airport, and of course, this guy at the end. This is the sad one. He says, "Yok abi," right? I didn't get through. I couldn't get through. This one's speaking English. Paper, please. So of course they're worried about getting through the yok abi. That's the sad part. So I'm going to give you the voices of the people that I interviewed. So in the book that I'm writing right now, I have chapters with stories, and one of the chapters is about the stories of hiding. Another one is of jail. Another one is of crossing. So here's just a few excerpts from interviews. So this is Zehra. That's not her real name. I'm not using any real names here. She's a bank employee, and she was 37 when I interviewed her. And so she said, "Our child was heavily affected because he had to leave all his toys. And we didn't have our own house. He couldn't understand what was going on. When we were going out with him to the playground, we spent the entire time there, watching guard, watching our backs in case somebody was following us. Our son had to go to school, and my mother would come quickly and secretly take him to school, but we couldn't even visit with her. After the coup, we were afraid of being arrested. When my husband was sleeping, I'd watch the security camera. We would take turns sleeping and watching guard. After September 1, we packed our stuff. We put it in our car trunk and spent a week at my mother's place, my husband's uncle's place, and then in my uncle's place. We rotated like this for a year, hiding." You can imagine the stress of that. So prison stories. So this one is particularly disturbing. So if you don't want to hear it, you should walk away for a minute, okay? Or mute me. So this is Maher, 42. He was a PhD student. "They didn't allow me to sleep. If they thought I was asleep, they turned on the lights. I begged them to call my lawyer or call my wife, and I'll tell you whatever I know. They didn't respond. That evening at 5 or 6 o'clock, a man told me to turn your face to the wall. They handcuffed me and put a bag over my head. 2 men made me bend over. They were talking about the various things they could do to me." So he was tortured, and when I interviewed him, I had to leave the room for 10 minutes. He was fine when, he was okay to tell the story, but I was not okay listening to this story. So here's Hilal, 45, history teacher. "The most difficult part of being in jail is being a mother. During this time, my children were alone at home. No one was taking care of them. We put our heads on pillows and hid our tears. My best friend was my pillow because she witnessed my tears." One of the most painful stories that I heard, is from a gentleman that was held in prison. And he was held with a woman. She was in a cell next to him. And he didn't know her. And she was there with her baby. But they came and took away her baby, he said. And he could hear her screaming for her baby. And then the next day screaming because her breasts were impacted with milk. And he felt guilty. I mean, the worst part was that this man who didn't know the woman, and he never met the woman, but he just heard her, he felt guilty that he couldn't help her. Here's another picture of, here's Turkey, and here's Greece. And I find it interesting that, I don't know, it looks like Greece has apartments, like they're living in little apartments here, of course, with lots of dogs. Look at all the dogs everywhere. And in Turkey, it looks like people are having houses. Huh. Okay, so these stories have to do with crossing the river. So Sumaya, who's a biology teacher and also a polio survivor, she was pushed back. She was with a group of people that were pushed back on the Greek side. So she said, she's talking about her experience of arriving to Greece and meeting the border officials. "So there we met with police officers. We got into a van and my niece was pregnant. We couldn't even breathe. The van was terrible. When we got to the edge, they told us to get out. We don't want you in Greece. Go back to Turkey." One of the guys was wearing a military uniform and a mask. "We told them we don't want to go back. We are Gulenist. We don't want to go back." When one of us resisted, one of the military guys beat him with a baton. So they did actually get pushed back, and they slept on the Turkish side for one night in the bushes, and then in the morning they were somehow successful to go back to Greece. So Zeynep is 33. She's a physicist. She says about her experience crossing the river. She says, "We walked for hours. I had to nurse my baby while walking. The smuggler was rough with the baby to try to make her quiet, but my husband stopped him. The smuggler said we would cross a swamp. While we were in the swamp, the smuggler said the water would be up to our knees, but it was up to our chests. We crossed the river and swam. It was cold, nighttime, and we had to change all of our clothes, and our shoes fell off in the swamp. Some of us had more shoes in our bags, but not everybody. We kept going." This image is interesting. It's just, so you have a boat going towards the sun, right? Going towards the sun. And it looks like, of course, Greece, right? Because you see the crosses, looks like the boat's going towards Greece. And then on this side, you have people that can't go because they're locked up, right? They're not able to get on the boat. I find this one amazing. So when we think about displacement, of course it's a crisis. Of course, this is a human tragedy, but this is not the only way to look at it. Anthropologist Lisa Malki, she argues that if we merely understand displacement as a tragedy, quote, "looking no further can mean that one gains no insight at all into the lived meanings that displacement and exile can have." So there's potential for exile, there's potential for displacement. There's ways in which people have reframed it. And I'm not trying to say that that makes it okay, or that people are, that this is a rosy ending. I'm just saying that when people are trying to create meaning out of their experiences, sometimes the meanings that they make are very powerful. So here you have, it looks like a girl and a boy, right? And they are both carrying, Turkish balloons and Greek flags. So that's very sweet. Looks kind of like a Greek girl. Well, I don't know if Greeks are blonde, some Turks are blonde, I don't know. But so the ability to narrate and interpret one's own journey forms an integral part of the healing process. So if you can tell your own story somehow, it helps you heal. According to anthropologists Elzbieta Gozdiak and Diana Shandy, religion also plays a positive role. And in fact, it's not just those scholars, I'm researching this. Religion can actually help people construct meaning out of tragedy in many cases. So how does Hizmet do that? Because Hizmet does offer a spiritual way to make meaning from suffering. Hoja Effendi has said that the pain of alienation from God, like the reed cut from the reed bed, right? It can serve as a starting point to gain spiritual strength. So just the feeling that you're not one with God or close to God, this can just that very feeling, that sad feeling, can help you gain spiritual strength. So thus, sorrow has potential to help you be spiritual, right? So in Turkish, it's hüzün. It can be transformed through service to others, hizmet, into hoşgörü, or empathetic pluralistic engagement. So as you feel sad, you realize you're separated from God. So if you carry out service to others, you practice empathy for others, this can help you become closer to God. So then sorrow is a vehicle towards closeness to God. It also, when you feel it together with other people in the same community, it can be a powerful force of identity, and it can create solidarity. It's a shared experience. And here you have the Turkish side, right? A lot of the kids drew the pictures, like there's a half and a half. So this looks like Turkish police looking for people, catching girls, this little girl's here. So what about the meanings that they made? Maher said, and he was tortured, right? He said, what keeps me alive is to believe in God and family. I just pity those torturers who tortured me. I feel sorry for them. I feel terribly sad for them. So he was able to have empathy for them, which I think is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful to have empathy for those that hurt you, because then you realize it wasn't about you. And you also realize that it's they that are hurt and not really you, that you're okay. So Hilal is 45 and she's a history teacher. She said, I learned loneliness. Hajar, Abraham's wife, now I understand her situation. I've read about her, but now I have more empathy for Hajar. I learned nothing is as important as Allah. In the past, I thought about this, but I didn't experience it. So Nurjan said, in jail, mostly I read Quran. I understand the Quran better in jail. I read different prophet stories and I thought it was like my life. So Yesma said, we read Sayyid Nursi and other Islamic sources and thought about leaving the material world. But when we crossed the Marij, I understood this and I lived this. I realized that this was self-criticism in our country. We had Syrian refugees and we should have done more for them. So this is in a picture by a child, I think under the age of 5. I think this kid did a really great job with this though. So how can we help Turkish refugees or refugees in general? Because again, we shouldn't just help Turkish refugees, right? We should expand that through empathetic engagement with others to helping all displaced people. Of course, donations to Embrace Relief and other refugee agencies are crucial. In fact, I just interviewed, I just met with the founder of First Bricks, and that's it's an organization that asks volunteers to run an online school for refugee children. And so if you're interested in being a teacher for First Bricks, you can look that up, because you just can even do it once a week or 1 hour a week or something. And it helps refugee children learn when they're displaced, because for example, kids in Greece can't really it's very hard for them to go to school in Greece because it's all in Greek. You can also help refugees connect to psychological, educational, vocational, and charitable institutions. One big thing to do is to make sure that there's no stigma if they need mental health treatment. I mean, right now, after the coup attempt, many people in the movement need mental health treatment. It's just been very depressing for many people. So I think the problem is that there's a stigma in Turkish society about this. So we need to combat that stigma. We need to create and support language and employability programs. This is very important. Refugees don't want a vacation. People that are displaced want to work. Everybody wants to work, really. They want to feel as though they're useful to society, even while they're displaced. It's also, if you can volunteer, of course, at First Bricks or for Embrace Relief, or if you can teach a language or help a refugee fill some forms, provide daycare, or provide money for daycare. You can mentor somebody or help children with homework. This is really powerful. Even raising awareness regarding displaced persons is powerful, even if it's just on Facebook, social media, etc. Even that helps. Every little bit helps. And of course, at the end of the day, we all need to address the root causes of displacement in general. Because again, never have so many people been displaced on Earth ever. And so we need to think about why that is and treat that. So in conclusion, despite their trauma, refugees were able to look forward and make meaning. And that I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture. I'm just telling you what they told me, that when they were trying to understand what had happened to them and explain what had happened to them, many of them did say that they had changed, that the experience had changed them. So they said that they processed their pain through their faith and made adaptive meanings. Many felt that they lived the pain of religious figures and they gained spiritual understanding. They had more empathy for others. They had coping skills via faith, they would say things like, dunya is not important, we can transcend dunya. We've learned that, you know, the only important things are our hizmet, our family, and God. And then they also tended to say things like they had a greater appreciation for freedom, and they realized that freedom isn't free. You have to pay for it. You have to fight for it, for justice, for human rights, and also for the hizmet movement. They realized that many people said hizmet is our family. Our family sometimes is no longer our family, but hizmet is our family. And here's another lovely image for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Professor Sophia. Now I'll be asking you a few questions.
Sure.
So for those living in Greece currently, how do the Turkish refugees conceptualize their displacement in Greece? I think I'm particularly also interested in children, like how they see their displacement and kind of conceptualize it.
So I don't think the children always understand quite what's happening to them. They just know that they had to run to Greece, and you know, I think they're trying to make the most out of it. Their parents probably told them that they are not safe in Turkey and that they're going to be safe, you know, that the happy place is where they're going, as you can tell from all of those pages folded in half, right? So there's a bad place and a good place, and they're trying to get to the good place. And I think that that's how they conceptualized it. A lot of the parents told me that they would tell their kids that they were playing Survivor when they were crossing the river, that they had to play Survivor, and that when they would cross, the kids would say, did we win? Did we win? You know, did we win the contest? And so I think the parents are doing a tremendous job trying to keep the kids happy. And that works most of the time. I did meet one mother who had twin children when she crossed, twin babies, and she said that she was detained in the camps for a couple days, and they didn't even give her diapers for her children, so her children just had to sit in their soiled diapers for 3 days or something awful like that, those twins. And when I interviewed her, she said that, you know, she basically said that she didn't want to be with her children anymore. They were, at that time, they were 2. And so I stopped my interview because that was such a stunning thing that she was revealing to me. And she said, yeah, I just don't want to be with them anymore. And I said, but you are with them? And she goes, yes, I'm with them, but I don't want to be with them anymore. So for some, this is just too traumatic. I don't want to make this sound like it's all going to be okay. For some people, this is really, really seriously traumatic. And they of course need access to mental health facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so moving on to my next question, I know you touched on it, but can you describe the mental health impacts of being a refugee, particularly the trauma that people face as they are displaced?
Yeah, so it's so insomnia, anxiety, hair loss, stomach problems, higher divorce rates. I haven't heard of suicide within the movement, but you know, collective trauma in general, higher suicide rates. I have heard of higher divorce rates, by the way. I have heard of a lot of family trauma within the movement. Just like one family member wants to give up the movement, wants, you know, they don't approve of the movement, like the husband decides, oh, you know what, I don't like this movement after all, but the wife wants to stay in the movement, and then they divorce. So there's a lot of stories like that. And then there's also, let me think, children sometimes when they have to go to schools in new countries, they can experience bullying because they are not wearing good clothing and not speaking the language, and they look different from the other children, so they can be bullied, they can be discriminated against. Again, the worst thing for me is that the parents are, you know, or especially earlier on, I think the movement is doing a better job now trying to provide assistance. But as this sort of surprised everybody in 2016, early on, parents were all on their Twitter feeds and talking about the political situation just, you know, in front of their children, and I think children were very traumatized by this. So it's been hard for people to process. I think the next generation is going to have some inherited trauma, definitely, from this.
Yeah, you mentioned that trauma can manifest like as transgenerational trauma. So how do you think that the kids can heal from their trauma?
I think that collectively, I mean, I've been reading about this, and when the trauma happened to the group as a whole, then you don't heal by yourself, you heal within the group because it happened to the group. So I think that is happening. I think through, many programs and stuff that people are talking about, and people are beginning to deal with this more and more. And I think I've also noticed that some of the youth are going to Greece to help the refugees. The youth are now becoming more engaged in projects to help with the situation. And an unusual amount of young people are telling me they want to be human rights lawyers within the movement. I don't know if this is happening in Australia too, but a lot of the teenagers or the 20 somethings that were displaced, they say, yeah, after this happened, what I want to be is a human rights lawyer. I don't want this to happen to other people. So I think that's a really interesting outcome.
Yeah. How are Turkish refugees treated by Greek authorities, Professor Sophia?
So, it's mixed, okay? A lot of Greeks are really happy to see refugees. There's a term, I'm trying to think of the term, but it's not coming to my mind this second, but it means love for the stranger. And so Greeks actually believe that people that come to them should be treated almost like gods. This is an ancient Greek idea that people that come should be treated like gods, and that anybody running to them because of a human rights violation should be taken care of because they see themselves as the bastion of democracy, right? But as you know, there are also a lot of Turks that are AKP supportive in Greece, especially in Thessalonica. And they are perhaps behind the pushbacks. And there's also another group called the Golden Dawn Movement that is, they are a far right anti-immigrant group that could also be behind the pushbacks. Because as you know, that some people are being pushed back and also beat up in the woods.
So maybe I'll get some questions from the chat box. So feel free to put your questions in through the chat box, anyone, if you want to ask a question. So Salih Hijel asked a question here. So how do you see the future of these immigrant children who face such trauma?
And I think the future will be mixed depending on the resources that they get. For those children that are able to access mental health resources and lots of language training, and their parents are still okay, and I think that they'll be fine. And I think that they maybe will, Edward Said, he actually has an essay on exile and displacement, and he says that people that have experienced exile and displacement, sometimes they are the artists, the musicians, the poets, because they understand in a way that other people don't what it's like to miss the homeland, what it's like to yearn for something that you cannot have, what it's like to imagine, a place, a town that you can't go back to. And so this comes out in music, art, theater. This comes out. So there's a lot of potential for that is possible. But like the mother of those twins, I really hope that she gets help. But as of right now, I feel very, very worried about her kids, right? She's obviously not receiving enough support. And yes, I did actually have to, tell somebody that when I was in Greece, I had to say, look, something needs to be done. This family is not okay. And can you imagine? She didn't want to play with her kids. She didn't want to play with them or be with them. Yeah. And they were only 2.
That's quite horrifying. Yeah. So another question here is, how do Turkish refugees keep themselves occupied in Greece?
Yeah, one of the hardest part of being a refugee is boredom, right? Your life is interrupted. And so it might be kind of exciting and also horrifying to cross the river. But once you're processed and you're friendly in your Airbnb, it can just be boring. Like you're just waiting. You're not in your university program. You're not teaching. You're not doing what you used to do. You don't know what you will do. So it is hard to pass time. And I think they pass time by talking to one another and visiting each other, and also engaging in online activities, engaging in language training, which is very important. Language training, trying to figure out how they're going to get to the next country, because most of the refugees in Greece, of course, are trying to get to Germany or Finland, Italy, etc. And you know, they're trying to figure all of those things out. And then some people do go sightseeing in Greece, of course. You know, it's very nice to go see the Acropolis.
Sure. Apparently, in an article named "Pain Doesn't Differ, Turkish Refugees Help Greek Fire Victims" that you wrote, would you be able to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, my first trip to Greece was really kind of dramatic, because as I was flying into Greece, you know, I almost flew into Turkey on the day of the coup, by the way, and then I flew into Greece the day of the fire. So, you know, sadly, over 99 people were, you know, they died in the fire, and more people were burnt. So, you know, the Abiy, the Büyük Abiy in Greece, he wanted to do something about this catastrophe, and so did a lot of the other refugees. They just felt tremendously grateful to the Greek people for allowing them to be in Greece, and they really felt as though they wanted to help. And in fact, there were doctors and nurses amongst the refugees. And so this man, you know, the one that was sort of taking me around a little bit, he got all of the doctors and nurses in a big van, and also got some food, water, and cookies, all kinds of other things, and took it to the city hall of the town that had experienced the fire. And so they, you know, everybody arrived. I was there as well. Everybody arrived, and he presented all of the things and to the mayor of that city, and also I think Rafia was the city, to Rafia, and then also said that if she needed any, you know, doctors or nurses, that he had them there amongst the refugees. So that was a really nice meeting. I remember how kind the mayor was to the doctors and nurses that were also displaced. And there was a lot of, it was very heartwarming.
Very nice. Yeah, so this brings us to the end of the talk. Before closing, I just want to say thank you so much, Professor Sophia, for sharing your insights into this very important topic, and also sharing all the artwork that you've collated. I would like to warmly also thank our viewers today for tuning in and listening to the talk so patiently. Yeah, have a great rest of the day and stay safe.
And thanks very much for having me.